Joining me on my right is Dr. Jerry Satanovich, and why don't y'all identify yourself?
Detective Donald Zanatelli.
Sergeant Travis Easerman.
Sergeant Thomas Guy.
Lieutenant Donald Mernier.
Thank you all for coming this morning. We're here to announce the arrest of Ronald Gasser, white male, born 12/17 of 61, for the count of manslaughter as it relates to the incident relative to the killing of Joe McKnight that occurred Thursday afternoon at the corner of Holmes and Berman Highway. First, let me say to the McKnight family, thank you for your patience, your restraint, and your trust in the process and in this organization. It has brought about, for the most part, a sense of calm in this community and set a tone that was necessary in order for us to do the job that we needed to do. Now, there's been many questions about the decisions that were made by this organization relative to this investigation that started on Thursday. Friday, we had a press conference to try and bring about a sense of calm that I was not able to, at that point in time, out of an abundance of caution, to not taint witnesses that we knew that we were looking for, and I'll explain how we knew, but felt that it was important to try and bring about that sense of calm in the community. Thursday evening, we had a statement by Mr. Gasser. We had no corroborating statements, and we had no contradictory statements of witnesses that we were able to gather that evening. So I had a statement. In this state, whether we like it or not, we have a very forward-leaning, stand your ground, self-defense, justifiable homicide laws, however you want to refer to it, that is very much in an affirmative fashion that creates for us an obligation to make sure that we get it right. Justice has no time period. Justice is not a sprint, it is a marathon. These investigations are marathons. In fact, it is not uncommon, and there's nothing that we've done in this case out of the ordinary or that is unusual, and I can point to hundreds of cases whereby we've identified shooters or otherwise accused perpetrators that we know have committed a crime that we do not arrest at the point in time of us knowing that, whether there's an admission or not, for strategic reasons in an investigation. Because our arrest is only as good as a prosecution. We accomplish nothing if we make an arrest and we can't put ourselves in the best posture, there are no guarantees, to reach a successful prosecution. So for those who have criticized the men and women of this organization and the strategy decisions that we made relative to that, tough. I don't care. Because what I know is that I can put my head on the pillow every night knowing that we've done the right thing for the right reasons. To give you an example, Mr. Gasser never did ask for an attorney. We have over 10 hours of non-custodial interviews with him and over 2 hours of a custodial interview with him. We got a consent search of his home, which I would have never had the probable cause to search his house, and so many other things that we were able to gain during the course of our interaction with Mr. Gasser because what we were able to do strategically. In fact, while I was here Friday talking to you at 1 p.m. Friday afternoon, we had Mr. Gasser in a 3.5-hour interview asking him questions and circling in on his statement relative to what we knew and what we uncovered in the autopsy based on the forensics. I'll say again, if people don't think that we know what we're doing strategically and that we were going forward, as I said on Friday, in a deliberate and definitive way, tough. I don't care. We conducted over 160 interviews in this case. We identified 260 folks that we had an interest in talking to based on license plate recognition camera hits of multiple cameras in the location of this particular happenstance. We talked to over 70 business owners in an attempt to retrieve video. All of this since Thursday afternoon through yesterday at approximately 5 p.m., wherein in this very room we collectively came together and decided that we were prepared to draft an arrest warrant for the arrest of Mr. Gasser. As I pointed out on Friday, that there were witnesses we knew that existed that we did not yet have contact with, is exactly what happened in this case. On Saturday, we finally located a witness that was key to this case, and in fact, by happenstance, several other witnesses since Saturday up until last night at 7 p.m. that we located yet another witness that was key to making this case. So just as I pointed out on Friday, and our suspicions that we were going to be able to get our hands around additional witnesses that would help in this case actually came to fruition. We conducted multiple crime scene reenactments with the assistance of the coroner's office on Friday, as well as Sunday, and again yesterday. We conducted multiple consultations with the coroner's office and the district attorney's office, as well as other seasoned prosecutors who were not with the district attorney's office as it relates to what we were doing in this case. Now, I just can't not address some other issues that I am very much disappointed in the conduct of some of the citizens of not only this parish but this country. And at some point in time, we're going to have to come to grips with and begin to talk about this dialogue and this rhetoric that's going on in this country. We started Thursday afternoon with a witness who lied. A witness who said that Gasser got out of his car, popped caps through the windshield of Joe McKnight's car, yanked him out of the car, and popped him again while he was on the ground, saying that he had voted for Donald Trump and he was going to show him relative to, to that, and we were off and running. And you know why? Because some people wanted that story to be true. And it's what compelled me to have this press conference on Friday, was to try and bring a sense of calm and reasonableness to this and to create a distraction from that, because that was the furthest from the truth. Thursday night we were busy talking to witnesses, we had yet to run the the search warrants on the two vehicles in order to begin the forensic process of processing these vehicles, and we are off and running. We are off and running. That particular witness told 3 different stories in the span of an hour. Shame on that individual. Shame on that individual. And that started something going down a path that we collectively should be ashamed of ourselves. And we began to criticize people for just asking for pause. Let the process take its course. But no, that wasn't enough. We had to make demands. We want justice now. And if we don't get it now and we don't get it our way, we're going to start saying things and doing things until we get it our way. It's not about the right thing. It's not about justice. And it's not about the process. It's about what we want and what we want now. And we don't care who we disparage in the process. I want to thank Councilman Mark Spears, Representative Rodney Lyons, Senator Troy Carter, and Representative Jimmy Harris for standing up. They're not paid to be law enforcement. But they stood up after conversations with me, and I explained to them what was going on and the difficulties of this case, and asked the community to relax, to pause, to show patience, to show tolerance. This isn't about race. Not a single witness has said up to this day that there was one racial slur uttered during the course of these events. And unfortunately, a life was lost. But you want to know something, folks? 2 people engaged in bad behavior that day. Why? I don't know. But they did. And we're going to criticize everybody else for just letting the process take the course. Our elected leaders that stood by me, and I want to thank them again, you are true leaders. You are credible leaders. You did not do what was in your best interest. You did what was in the best interest of the community, and you're suffering for it, and I feel bad for you. I do. And I'm sure you see the emotion in me, because it's not fair. It's not fair for him to be called, you punk-ass Uncle Tom Coon. We saw you sell out to them, you rat-ass faggot punk. That's the tone of what we're calling our elected leaders for standing up and simply saying, let justice prevail and let the process take its course. To go on to say, you ass-kissing faggot that has done little to our community, all we know is that you are a bitch puppet, you rat-ass looking coon on TV. I bet they made you say that, puppet boy. I know what I see. I know that Norman is a piece of shit, and you stood behind that white boy with that bullshit, nigga. You won't even stand with your people, you self-serving son of a bitch. Really? And the tone of these go on and on and on and on, and all we simply asked for was let them do their job. That's it. To the ministers who I met with at Hosanna Church the other day, you are credible leaders. You gave me the opportunity to explain what was going on, how we were going through this. And you have received, from what I understand, nothing but criticism. That you weren't more aggressive, that you didn't make more demands, and that you've had parishioners threaten to leave your church. Shame on these folks. Shame. We're constantly talking and asking all of us to reach across the aisle, to embrace one another amongst the races. And when we do so, when we collectively stand together, this is what we call one another. Shame on you. It's completely and totally uncalled for. To you, I feel bad, and I apologize. I thank you for being the credible leader that you are. And I know on our day of reckoning, you will be recognized for standing up and doing the right thing. I know that. To the folks, and it ain't about me, because I don't care about me, but to the folks that have said the god-awful things about these guys, that I've had to hear that their kids have asking, when are you coming home so that we can put up our Christmas tree? And they haven't been home since Thursday night in order to accomplish what we've accomplished in this case for the bad behavior of two people that started this thing? And calling these men and ladies that are out there working the overtime, because I'm demanding it, for the purpose of getting to the end of this situation. And here we are Tuesday, at 10 a.m., and this thing from Thursday to Monday, accomplishing all that they have accomplished. Shame on you. Shame on you. When all they've tried to do is their job to get to the truth. To get to the truth. I bring that up, folks, today because it's not even really anymore about this case. It's about all the other cases that are yet to come. We better reflect and look at ourselves in the mirror and decide, what are we going to be about in our community? Are we going to continue to tear ourselves apart? We don't even give people the opportunity to do what they're supposed to do. And in this case, I will tell you, from the first instance of what went out on the social networks, we created an environment that we now know witnesses were afraid to come forward. Afraid. Afraid. And I can promise you, had I made an arrest Thursday night, they would not have come forward. For sure. In some cases. Because they said they got him. I don't need to get involved. But that was the furthest from the truth. Because this case, even as of right now, 10 a.m. Tuesday morning, is still maturing, is still developing, and is still moving forward. If you're sincere about justice in the future, I would suggest to you that you pause and you let your elected folks in the criminal justice system or appointed folks in your criminal justice system do their job. Do their job. Because all you've served is as an impediment to them doing their job. You're scaring witnesses away. You're sending things down a course that we need not travel. And you're treating people unfairly for doing the right thing. For just simply doing the right thing. How unreasonable were these requests? Don't jump to a conclusion. Relax, pause, wait. Let us see what is going to happen. I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Sheriff, what actually happened on Thursday?
There was an altercation that started at two vehicles on some point in time, either on or just before getting on the Crescent City connection. Both individuals driving erratically, not necessarily engaged yet. We have a witness that says that Mr. McKnight was driving erratically across the bridge. At some point in time, possibly cut Mr. Gasser off. Mr. Gasser, in his statement, says that he was irritated by that and set out after Mr. McKnight. They took the General de Gaulle exit, went down General de Gaulle, engaged each other many times during that process up until Berman Highway. They both made a right turn on Berman Highway. Still involved in verbal altercations down Berman Highway, on each other's tail, cutting in front of one another, zipping around vehicles, on and on and on, up until the time that Mr. Gasser was able to get in front of Mr. McKnight at the red light at Holmes and Berman. Mr. McKnight pulls around on the right-hand side, comes to stop on the side of Mr. Gasser's car at Holmes and Berman. There's a car in front of Mr. Gasser, a car next to that car, a car next to Mr. Gasser, a car behind him, behind that car, a car behind Mr. Gasser, and Mr. McKnight's car on the right-hand side. Mr. Gasser is hemmed in and does not have an avenue for retreat as it relates to his vehicle, into a verbal altercation while still being in each other's car. At some point, Mr. McKnight exits his car and goes to Mr. Gasser's car. There continues to be a verbal altercation at that point in time, and at some point in time during that verbal altercation, Mr. Gasser pulls his weapon from between his seat and the console and fires 3 shots at Joe McKnight, killing him at that point in time. And that's basically the details of that story. I'm not going to go into what Mr. Gasser's statement was, but suffice it to say that it is replete with statements talking about his fear of McKnight making threatening statements and otherwise, and that's why on Thursday evening, only faced with and only having Mr. Gasser's statement, that we thought it was best that arrests not be made for strategic reasons until we could get other witnesses. Remember, I said we had the LPR camera. We only had 6 witnesses that we were able to interview that evening, none of which said they saw the shooting. None. Other than the witness who made up the story about Mr. Gasser getting out of the car and firing caps through the windshield. There were no bullet holes in the windshield. So we knew that story was false from the get-go, that it could not have happened. Now, there were other witnesses. Mr. Gasser did get out of his car after shooting Mr. McKnight and taking kind of I guess for lack of a better term, a police sweeping position when he came around the car because Mr. McKnight fell between the two vehicles to see what actually happened to him. That's when the military guy approached him. Gasser turned with the weapon. The naval officer suggested to him that he did not want to shoot a military officer, suggested that he put the gun in his pocket. He did. And they began to administer CPR on Mr. McKnight at that point in time, one of my officers and the military officer.
What were you able to learn from the witnesses that you've spoken to since then that has helped you with this case?
Well, I'm not going to get into all of their statements. I'm not going to have this case tried in the media. That is not going to help this case at all. That's the general sense of the sequence of events, and I'm just going to leave it there. Suffice it to say that obviously that a lot of the independent witnesses have provided information that don't completely square up with Mr. Gasser's statement, which is why we wanted to get independent witnesses to see if there was going to be contradiction or corroboration as it related to that, so that we could best assess what ultimately should be done in this case from a charging perspective, if at all, and if possible. And that's what we set about doing, looking at the forensic evidence, looking at his statement, looking at all of the particulars that we had. In hindsight, having the opportunity to interview him based on the forensic evidence that we were able to gather, to me, I think as I've talked to any number of defense lawyers and prosecutors, they've all said anytime that you have a defendant who's willing to talk and has not lawyered up and tells you a story, and we now have in excess of 10 hours of interviews, that's a plus. So had I arrested him Thursday night, it would have been over. I would not have had this opportunity to talk to him. He would have engaged with a lawyer, and I would not have had the opportunity to start trying to figure out exactly what happened. Because even though we had all of these people right around, everybody was doing something, messing with their phone, their iWatch, their this, their that, not paying attention. Some folks heard the shots and didn't even realize they were gunshots, and didn't look up, and they were right there until they saw people administering CPR. So that's what we had.
Sheriff, can you explain why you felt the need to read some of those foul comments that were directed toward local officials?
Because we in this society today are demanding immediate results, and we don't even know what we're talking about. And we're castigating people that are trying to do the right thing, threatening them. This one's not the worst one.
But does it change anything, you reading those comments, especially?
Yeah, I hope it gets everybody to realize how crazy we're getting. And that we need to create pause, and that we need to understand that people just simply asking to let them do their job and don't rush to judgment and don't start, creating this furor, as it relates to this, just simply because they said, let them work through this process.
But do you understand where some of that fear and angst comes from when you look a young black man is shot to death and a white man who's admitted to killing him is sent home.
Let me ask you, do you think if that victim would have been white that this would have been sent?
I don't
Does it
know,
matter?
I'm asking you.
Does the race matter? As a society, that's the point.
And I know you're saying this needs to come to an end.
It needs to come to an
Do
end.
you understand where that fear and anger comes from?
I was asked the question the other day after my 1 p.m. conference by a reporter, what can you say to me to make me feel safer that this is not going to happen to me vis-a-vis a white shooter? And my response to him was, well, if I look at the empirical data, black on black murders in this parish are 78% of the murders are committed by black perpetrators, and 78% of the victims of murder in this parish are black. So if we're just going to look statistically, your fear is, I mean, what you're trying to articulate right now is misdirected. And in fact, of that, predominantly black males, who only represent 12 point something percent of the population. Of the shootings in this parish, over 80% are committed by the same folk. So when we begin to look at the underlying empirical data, your fear is not here.
It's not my fear, I'm just asking.
But
if you
no,
understand
when I say when
anger and
no,
fear.
when I'm talking to this individual, what I'm saying to him is your fear is not here. If you want to look at the statistical data, your fear is somewhere else. So let us not try to make this out to be something that it is not. What we had were two adult males engaged in unacceptable behavior that did not understand how to deal with conflict resolution, and this thing went to a point that unfortunately led to incredibly tragic consequences over bad driving behavior and bad spoken words. Simply put, at the end of the day. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your time. The forensics show that the bullets entered Mr. McKnight at an angle where someone was standing literally over top of him, looking down. Or
No, that's not what the
bent over.
that's not what the forensics show.
The angle we were told earlier this week that the angle would show that Mr. McKnight would have had to have been bent over. Was Mr. McKnight bent over and trying to enter Mr. Gasser's car, or at any point did he go through and enter into
Mr. McKnight was in fact bent over, leaning over. He had to lean over in order to look into the car to go eye to eye with Mr. Gasser. Mr. Gasser's driving an Infiniti sedan. So anybody over the height of 3'6" is going to have to bend over in order to look into the vehicle in order to go eye to eye with the driver.
Did he enter the car when he bent over? Because then that kind of brings into the.
I'm not going to get into that. We're getting to where I don't want to discuss that. But the fact of the matter is, what we know is that they were in fact in a verbal encounter at the vehicle.
And not knowing Louisiana law, sir, just to follow up, what is the difference between charging manslaughter or charging murder? How did you make the differentiation between those two?
Well, based on the elements that we have available to us in comparison to the elements of the crimes, whether it be first, second, manslaughter, or negligent homicide, collectively we felt that manslaughter was the charge that most appropriately fit the evidence that we have at this time. As I said, this case is still maturing. We may get additional evidence that would allow the DA to upcharge, or we may get additional evidence that may compel the DA to downcharge. But at this point in time, we believe that we have the evidence that fit the elements of manslaughter.
Sheriff, how much
Yes.
does the fact that Gasser was hemmed in go into your calculation on what to charge? Because that depends on his ability to escape if he didn't want to.
Well, understand that the stand your ground law in Louisiana does not require that you retreat. So retreating as it relates to that defense is not a requirement.
But the fact that he couldn't drive on and that there were people who were blocking him.
It's
that
just,
goes into
it's just
calculation.
another factor in the totality of circumstances, but it's not required by the law, which even complicates the sets of circumstances and facts even further. It's not required.
Sheriff, how were you able to find these additional witnesses over the weekend that you said were too afraid to come forward at first? How did you find them?
Well, we ran their license plates, we figured out who they were, we started doing the investigation in order to get their phone numbers, reaching out to them, going to their addresses in some cases, knocking on doors, and making them aware that we were looking for them and we had an interest in talking to them. As I said, we've conducted over 160 interviews. We've identified 268 cars that we actually have an interest in talking to these people, so we're still looking for some folks as we speak today that we have a desire to talk to, in that regard. And we've reached out to over 70 businesses. One of the videos that we just got the other day, we actually got from one of the national news chains that was able to get a video that we were not able to get, as it relates to that. And that's been helpful in showing a snippet of time in relation to multiple witness accounts where it creates either corroboration or contradiction. So these are all pieces that are helpful to us.
On Friday, you said none of the videos actually showed the shooting. Is that still the case?
That's correct.
And Sheriff, you mentioned the stand your ground law justifiable homicides in Louisiana and being fairly strong. Can you describe what led you to think, even despite the strength of those laws, that you had a case here for manslaughter?
Well, I mean, the only way I could describe that is by going into the details, and I just said I'm not going to go into the details. So the fact of the matter is that in the totality of his statement, there were a number of things that he said and alleges that Mr. McKnight did that, could have been self-serving in his statement, but at Thursday night, I had nothing to corroborate or nothing to contradict his statement. Because the witnesses that we had at that point in time didn't see anything.
Can you explain the
you know,
manslaughter charge and how much time is facing convicted?
It's 0 to 40.
Based on the evidence you have now, are you confident that the prosecutor can get a conviction for manslaughter?
I don't ever make predictions. I mean, we can look at what happened yesterday.
Based on evidence.
We can look at what happened yesterday.
We're gonna just
I
take
mean,
one more question. Sheriff.
the fact of the matter is that, these cases are difficult. And one of the reasons why we deploy the strategic things that we do during the course of an investigation is going back to what I said before. Our arrest is only as good as a successful prosecution. My role is not simply just to go run out and arrest people. I can do that. And I tried to say this, and I've been criticized for saying it on Friday. I could have just simply, Thursday night, book them, Dano. Let's get it over with. But that would not have put this case in the best position to mature, in the best posture to mature, of giving all of the witnesses the best opportunity to come forward and share with us what they saw. So strategically, we decided, an important aspect of that, to give you an example, is we asked him for a consent search of his home. I had no probable cause to go search his home. He gave it to me. So we developed a level of comfort after searching his home that, that there wasn't anything there that led us to believe that, that we had any reasons to be overly concerned about this guy. Like, for example, if I would have walked in and he had 50 AK-47s or AR-15s on the front, laying on the sofa, it might have been a little bit different, right? It would have caused some suspicion and some concern for me. But we didn't find anything like that. And he willingly gave us that consent. So it created a comfort level for us that we were willing to go down and utilize this strategy in the hopes of being able to get some more non-custodial interviews with this individual. And in hindsight now, I can honestly say that we have reaped the benefits of that strategy. Obviously, we've been able to talk to witnesses, and we've been able to lock him in on a story and use the witness statements, in some cases corroborating his story, and in some cases contradicting his story.
What's the process for bringing formal charges now to the DA?
Well, he's been booked, and the reports and everything will be finalized and drafted, and all the statements transcribed, and we go through this process. It's a very lengthy process, and getting all of what we've done together and all of what we continue to do together wrapped up in a package, one final report drafted and submitted to the DA. These cases, so don't expect that the DA is going to screen this case by Friday. It's not happening. So we're going to be multiple weeks before that happens, because we have a lot of stuff that has to be pulled together and submitted to the district attorney's office. And that's typically how murder cases operate. They take longer than most others. Not to mention, we accomplished all of this not as an excuse, but simply as an observation. We had a deputy that was shot Saturday morning. A lot of these same guys, in fact, all of these same guys were out on that shooting because, they work in the homicide section. We ended up killing that shooter. So they worked that case. We then, that night, had a 10-month-old was murdered. Worked that, and all the while we're still interviewing the 160 plus, witnesses and running to businesses and this and that and trying to return calls of people that had called in and everything else that goes along with that. And that's why, I try to point out, and I don't mean to be offensive, we have sometimes unrealistic expectations of how these things work. And we have to take a commonsensical approach to what it is that we're doing. These are not easy things. You just don't go run out and start slapping cuffs on people day in and day out. No matter how egregious you think it is, it's a process that you got to put yourself in the best position to get to the best evidence. Best position to get to the best evidence. That's what you want to accomplish as an investigator. Not to satisfy the demands of the community at a point in time along a timeline. We can't be influenced by that. Emotional thinking rarely leads to good, positive outcomes. So thank you very much.
Did he have a gun in his car, or did he ever insinuate that he had a gun during the confrontation with Gasser? Did he have a gun? Did he ever insinuate that he had a gun?
McKnight did in fact have a gun in his car. We have no evidence to suggest that he insinuated at any point in time during the altercation that he did.
Did he have a permit for that gun?
It was not his gun. He was not in his car. It was not his car.
Whose car was it?
It was his stepfather's car.
Was it his stepfather's gun?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's enough. Thank you very much. Getting ready to send out the official photograph of Gasser's booking photo. as well as the charge, which is 1 count of manslaughter. So I'll send it in our normal, excuse me, I'll send it in our normal media distribution group, which are to the 4 networks here, two print media agencies, as well as the Associated Press. So we'll also post it on our website, JPSO.com, and I'll also put it on our JPSO Facebook page. So it'll all be there. It is the same photograph that's been circulating all morning long. I think NOLA.com might have did it, but I will now press the button and everybody can. How long? 6 more seconds. You want lunch? No. How long you want to be? Not for this evening, that's true. We're going to close this room at, Tim, we're going to close this room at 1 o'clock. So if anybody needs to do any broadcast, want to do anything from within this room, that's fine. You can remain outside the room after 1:30, but you can stay in here in the meantime. Let me just press this button.